So we're here today with our colleague John, who is going to tell us about this wonderful part of his collection of block instruments, some little oddities that you'll see along the way, and some standard instruments and the progression of how those instruments came to be. And as you can see, there's a little bit of a collection here, and this will form the first video in a series of videos, hopefully, of various things such as block controls and how the block instruments came to be and their history and lineage. And hopefully you'll enjoy this little video. Okay.
This is one of the older instruments in the collection, and it certainly looks quite different to a modern block instrument. It's in fact a Caledonian Railway instrument, and one of the interesting things about it is it is a two-position one-wire block. Most modern blocks, in fact all modern blocks, are three-wire. So it's one wire for each of the block lines and one wire for the bell, and then a return. But in the early days, things were a bit different. Wire was expensive and batteries were obviously expensive, so what this block did was use one wire for all the communications. You'll see it has two indicators, one for each line, up and down lines, and it worked on impulses, so it only gives two indications. The principle is that one pulse of current can ring the bell, well, gong in this case, and magnetise the indicators one way or the other. It's a Caledonian instrument. I think these were the largest blocks ever used in Britain. I would think the last one went out of use in the 70s. But that's probably one of the oldest instruments. So there were other early instruments of a similar era which had these indications like this. That mimics, if you think about it, the signal looking towards the other signal box. So when your mate sends you a bell signal accepting a train, that arm drops, and vice versa. If we accept a train, which you do by operating these plungers, that arm drops. It doesn't do it now, obviously, because it's not wired up. But that's certainly one of the older and more interesting instruments. Here are a pair of instruments which are probably familiar to many viewers. Here's a standard BR block instrument, the sort which survived to this day. Here's an LNWR Fletcher's instrument. Typical of many instruments, and certainly more modern instruments, they're combined units. So you have both needles and also the bell in one case. This is in fact a BR permissive instrument, which I think are quite rare today. It records line clear, line block, train on line, but being permissive, you can have several trains in one section. The commutator on these BR standard ones is quite nice because you can move it on 2, 3, 4, but it's so arranged you can't add two trains accidentally. Not 5, didn't do this right, did I? 5, 6, 7, no, well, locks, you see, you can't do two at once. The older permissive instruments were a bit more complicated with that, as you'll see in a minute. So that's a BR standard instrument. Here's a LNWR instrument, the so-called Fletcher's block, which were quite common until fairly recently. Again, two needles and bell in a single unit. This one is stamped. It's actually stamped Stockport, which was the old where the old LNWR signal works was. In fact, that will be one of the older ones because many of them mark Crewe, where the works went after Stockport. So that's in fact one of the earlier ones. There you are.
I was going to say our depot was actually based on that site. So that's a little bit.
You can add that if you want to.
A little bit of a legacy there.
Do you want to add that on or do a bit more? Or whatever?
It's already on, so...
okay.
Has that one got the small plunger on the side?
This one here?
Yeah.
That's an absolute block. No, it's not got the plunger on the side.
Plunger was for dropping the needles afterwards, wasn't it?
Oh, the permissive ones had a plunger.
They had the plunger, that's all right. Because I remember the ones at Stockport had a plunger on when they were the Fletcher's blocks.
That's right, they have a plunger. I don't have one in a minute, but I can show you a GC one, which is a bit different, which makes a nice comparison with that. Shall I do that next?
Yeah, we'll do that one.
So you've just seen a modern BR permissive instrument. Here's an older style of permissive instrument. This is a Great Central Railway one. It's stamped GCR in the top. Although it was made by a signalling company called Tyre & Co. As with the older instruments, lovely teak case, nice brass fittings, But the commutator is a little different to that one. To move it, you have to operate the plunger. This is to stop you adding 2 trains at once. So, line clear, locked, plunge, line closed, plunge, train on line, plunge all the way up to 6. I don't know where that one's from, but the GCR certainly had a fair number of these. They had many goods lines, and this was a typical permissive block instrument that they used. I don't know where it's from, but it does have a test label inside dated 1978, which is fairly late for that type of instrument. This is one of the most exotic instruments in the collection, and it's from Derbyshire. It's from the Derwent Waterboard Railway, which was a railway line put in the early part of the 20th century when the dams in the Howden and Derwent dams in the Derwent Valley were built. They needed a railway to transport the building materials, obviously, but it also carried a passenger service, and as such it required a signalling system. But it was rather unusual in many ways. The signalling was the block instruments, that is, were provided by the Midland Railway. But they're nothing like standard Midland instruments, which you'll see elsewhere in these film clips. It actually looks more like a Midland lamp repeater. There's a commutator here. That's for trains going from Derwent North. And for sending trains to Derwent North, our mate at the other end sends us an indication which appears on this top needle, although we don't get an indication here when we do that. It was a single line. Now, block instruments like this on single lines are distinctly unusual. There was an interlocking provided, a rather crude interlocking, so that if we peg here, if our mate at the other end tries to peg up line clear, he can't do it, it just breaks the circuit. I would think, although I can't prove this, they must have had some sort of staff as well. I'm not sure the Board of Trade would approve of this for passenger carrying single lines. And my understanding is that they had flag signalmen rather than fixed signals. There would have been a bell at the top here, but it's missing its dome, but you can see the striker, that's there. So all in all, a very unusual instrument.
I'm going to say, you mentioned that some of these turned up all together
yes.
at one point.
Well, the other odd thing about it, apart from being an unusual design of an unusual railway, the line finished operation, I don't know the exact date, but I would think before 1920. And so you might wonder where all these were sitting between 1920 and now. I don't really know, but about 25 years ago, one turned up at auction with the intriguing comment, "This was found in a dump in Bamford." That was in one auction. Another one turned up in the following auction. Another one turned up in the auction after that, and all 4 turned up altogether, with the price dropping each time. This one turned up some time later. But it's certainly very remarkable that these things actually survived. But it's very interesting nevertheless. Some of the instruments in these clips are combined units. They have 2 needles and often a bell in one unit, which became more popular in later years as that saved space on the block shelf. But some railway companies had instruments with just 1 needle per unit. And they trace their heritage, I think, back to this sort of instrument. Not a block instrument, it's a telegraph instrument, probably older, and used for sending messages by Morse code. Instead of the needle indication with train on line, line clear and line blocked, we have a needle here, and it moves from side to side, making a sort of tinging and tanging noise as it does on these sounders. That would be the message coming from the far end. We would send the messages with this handle here. For demonstration purposes, this one's been wired up to a battery. So these are very old, but in some places these remained in use until quite late, until the 1970s, I believe. I think the Great Northern area was one of the last users. This one's actually got a nice, on its side, it's got the card with the codes for the different signal boxes on the route. This one you see is from the GNGE joint line. Now some instruments followed this style. Here's one. This is a Great Northern instrument, also from the GNGE joint line. Lovely brass plate saying from Helpringham. But for a block instrument, you need a means of holding the needle over. There, every time you let go of the handle, it comes back to the centre. But to peg line clear or train on line, you need to hold the instrument over. The needle over. The handle over, sorry, I get it right. Some of the really early instruments had a peg and chain. Although sadly I don't have one of those to show you. But different railway companies had different ways of doing it. This here is a typical Great Northern instrument. So it's got what I like to call a pistol grip mechanism. So you squeeze that, it goes to one side, you let go and it latches. Centre position, other side, latches, centre position. And that would move, of course, in reality, but that's not wired up. So that's a typical GN pegging block instrument. That's the pegging part of the instrument. You need a non-pegger. There we are. That's the matching one for that. They're both from the same box, from Blow-Toft single box. But in the case of the GN, the non-pegging instruments were often half height, like this, but still with a nice ornate base and a nice top. Here are two more single needle instruments from different railway companies. You've seen a Great Northern one. Here's a nice Great Central one, including GCR on the needle unit. Different railway companies had different catch mechanisms. The GCR opted for a nice thumb catch like this. So you squeeze that, moves over and latches, centre, latches that way. That's the thumb catch, typical GCR. And also MSLR, but MSLR instruments are a bit harder to find than those. Here's another sort. This is a Midland Railway instrument. The catch mechanism on these perhaps wasn't quite so easy to operate. There's a little peg there. You pull the needle over and push it in. Holes, like that. Pull it out and it drops. Other side, push in, holes. Probably got used to it with practice, I would think. But that's a Midland instrument. A Midland pegging instrument.
Can you explain the brass item just there very briefly?
That's a very good question, Dominic. I'm not sure. I suspect it's something to do with... Shall we look inside? Let's have a look inside, shall we? Hang on. It's always fun looking inside block instruments, you know.
I know there's a recent discussion, wasn't there, on treadles and releases.
Right, well, first of all, this one's got, if you look inside, it's got a set of wiring tags which tells us where it's from. It's actually from Wathrow Junction in South Yorkshire. That there actually hasn't got anything, Dominic. There you are.
Just an empty.
It's an empty, what's it?
Would it have had a seal in it, or?
I've seen various things here. I've seen red lamps, and I've seen covered seals with covered with glass. This is obviously nothing. I suspect it was some sort of release or warning indication. I suspect it may have been to do with home normal control, but I'm not sure. We could look it up.
Again, inside's very, very simple, but very ornate bits of brasswork and metalwork in there. And spagnoleti.
That's right.
Indicator. And if I've got this right, these serrations on some instruments, including token machines, there's a third one in the middle, and there's a slight bit of doped material between the two, and this acts as an earth and a spark gap across should the voltages exceed the normal parameters.
Which is what you would need in with telegraph wires exposed in when lightning was about.
Yeah. Beautiful instruments. all to a reasonable standards design, very similar between all of them.
They were. You've just seen a standard Midland pegging instrument, but the Midland Railway also had another type of pegging block instrument, which was rather superior, I think. And here's an example. This is a Midland Railway rotary interlocking block instrument. They were particularly interesting because it was an early means of making sure the block system was totally safe against human error. We can look at that later on, but some things you want to do with a block instrument really is interlock it to the train detection and the signals to make sure the system doesn't fall over if the operator makes a mistake. And this was an early example of doing that. Basically, you have to operate this in the correct sequence, and you can't clear the section until the train has left the section and is detected by hitting a treadle, or in more modern times, a track circuit. This instrument's particularly interesting because it retains this feature here, which is exceedingly rare. This was usually removed. The Midland Railway, yes, it used the rotary block for signalling trains, the line clear, train on line, line blocked indications, but also at the halfway position they would send routing information via dial signals, and this is used in connection with that. That would send messages via the needle when it was at a certain midway position. But this feature is very unusual. You rarely see it on instruments. This feature was usually removed. I can show you inside, because they're very impressive inside as well. They're also very heavy. Take this lid off very carefully. Always with the block instrument lid, you pull, then lift. Otherwise you bash the needle. That's the inside. So let's start, right, at line blocks. Sorry, not wired up to anything electrically, but I can demonstrate how it works. You want to peg line clear, so you exchange bell signals, you go to line clear. At this point, you can't go back. If you do want to go back, perhaps if the train was cancelled, you have to use this feature here, which is electrically linked with the other end. And that will lift that solenoid, and then you can go back to line blocked. The key feature here is that both signalmen at both ends of the section had to press that. So to override it, you had to have two people to do it, which was a smart design feature. So we go to line clear. It actually latches halfway. That's where you would send the dial signals for routing purposes. You then go to train on line. It's now locked. It won't go any further and it won't go back. And it's locked there until one of two things happens. The usual thing is the train comes, it clears the section, hits the treadle, that latches up. It should latch up. Maybe this one wants a bit of oil. Oh, it worked. Yeah. And then you can clear the section. That's what usually happens. If you get to there and then you find the train's cancelled or you need to override it, you had to operate this button here, but there was a seal there, a paper seal with a glass on it, so it couldn't be done without the evidence of the action, and that would override it. So you would push that, and actually that mechanically, the seal's missing here, obviously. So you would break the glass, push that, and then it should clear. And I think this one, sorry, it might need a little bit of oiling, never mind. But there we are. That's a rotary interlocking block instrument. Rather splendid. The last ones came out of use on Network Rail in 2002. They were on the Suttle and Carlisle line. But we do know where this one's from, which is also interesting. There are wiring tags around the back, which confirm that it finished its days at Southend Central, working to Southend East. But there's even more to the story. See what fun you can have with block instruments. Here's the case. MRCO, 1912. The Midland Railway loves stamping things, and often dated things as well. And if you look inside it, hold on a minute. There we are. It states, I just wonder whether you can get this, Dominic. Number 326, ex-St Paul's passenger with a date, 31st July 1920. So we also know it came out of there in 1920. And I've seen a few rotary blocks with that similar inscription, removed from so-and-so, such and such date. That's interesting as well. If you look up the history of rotary block, and there are some Midland LMS documents that allow you to do this, you'll find that the very first rotary block ever installed was in St Paul's Passenger Junction. But not this one, alas. No, this wasn't the first, because it's 1912. The earliest one was a few years before that. A few years, but I forget the exact date. So it's interesting also, it's got a connection with St Paul's Passenger. So they are a splendid Midland Railway rotary interlocking block. Here are some more instruments, and again these are combined examples. This is stamped LNWR, Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway. These are nice smart instruments. You have both needle units in one case, and here's the commutator. And the plunger is in the centre of the commutator. The bell will be a separate unit, but the plunger is there. They're smart combined instruments. The idea of having combined instruments became more common in later years. And here we have two instruments which are quite a bit later. I would think from the 1940s. This is a Tyre and Co one, very large case. There's the commutator. These are were usually found in Scotland. Tyre and Co supplied a good number to the Scottish region, or to the LMS, and later, maybe later to the Scottish region. This one actually is a bit different. It's actually from the south end of the East Coast Main Line. How do we know that? Well, the clue, normally on an instrument you have the down line and the up line together, or up and down. But here you've got two down lines together. And that was a situation which existed at the bottom end of the GN Main Line. You had a series of signal boxes which signalled up trains and a series of boxes on the other side which signalled down trains. So this would do both rear and advanced sections in one instrument, for which you actually need two bells. So one instrument, and you'd have two bells with it. It's got a tapper here. There's actually photographic evidence that when these instruments were new, so I've seen photographs of them in Holloway, South Down, they actually had plungers. And the tapper arrangement is a later modification by the Eastern region. But that's one tapper. To work this properly, you need a separate bell, or tapper, because there's two. That works to two boxes. Here's another instrument. I think these are very smart. This is made by R.E. Thompson and Co, and again from the 1940s. Two needle units in one unit. There would have been a tapper there, which is now missing. And there's the commutator. These are actually interesting as being some of the first blocks to incorporate well-in control, but we will look at that in a later video. This is Eastern region. Well, it would have been supplied to the LNWR originally. I don't know where this one's from, but I've seen photographic examples of, and I've got other evidence of ones on the East Coast Main Line. And I've also seen photographs of them on the GC Main Line and some near Barnsley as well. They're not very common, but I think they're very smart instruments. One of the fun aspects of looking at old block instruments is that occasionally you find things which aren't quite what they first seem. Here's an example. Here we have a standard Midland Railway pegging block. I've seen it earlier. Stamped MR Co at the top. Midland Railway love to stamp things. In the middle, we have another instrument which looks at first sight like a Midland Railway pegging block. But I'm not so sure. It's not stamped Midland, and the mechanism and the catch handle is a little bit different. It's rather interesting, in fact. Here, you push it over, push the peg in to lock it. Release, push over, peg in to lock. This one, it latches of its own accord. And you pull out the little catch, it drops to the centre position. Pull it over, latch, release, which is really rather neat. Now, did the Midland Railway have an experimental type of commutator? I don't know. But I do know we've got this little interesting instrument here. Not a block instrument, actually a routing instrument. The needle unit's broken, sadly, but it makes up for that in other ways. It's even been used in two places. The original inscription says Micklehurst or Greenfield. So that refers to the Micklehurst loop on the Huddersfield-Staley Bridge line. But later on that's been crossed out and somebody's put Bradley Junction, Kirkburton branch. In fact, they've even put a nice plate on Bradley Junction, Kirkburton branch. So it would appear it finished its days in the Huddersfield area. But again, like this one, it's got an interesting commutator. It latches either side and it releases in the middle. So maybe you might wonder if that was an LNWR instrument originally, which went through the works and ended up with a Midland faceplate. Maybe. Let's look inside them. So, take the lid off. Put that out there. Always tip, then lift. This one. This screw is a bit, doesn't fit very well. Tip, lift, and, well, they're not identical, but you can see similarities. That's a smaller diameter commutator than that one, but the arrangement of the lightning protection is the same. That is stamped stock LNWR Railway Company. That one is not stamped anything. So maybe, well, there's an interesting one. We can speculate as to its history.
We've already had a look at this, and that says GS, and that says 20X on it. We thought that said box at first, but it says 20X on it.
No, so not a clue to where it's from, alas. Here's another instrument which isn't perhaps quite what it seems. We have here what looks very like a Midland Railway pegging block instrument. It's got the usual catch handle this time. You push it in, then push, like that. And then you pull out, other side pushing. That's the usual catch arrangement. But if you look carefully, zoom in on the top, Dominic, what do you see there? You make out the lettering?
CLC.
Indeed it is. Cheshire Lines Committee. Cheshire Lines block instruments are exceedingly rare. And here is one. Well, most of one. Alas, the commutator handle is missing. But you can see that the Cheshire Lines dial assembly was very different to anything else, really, and very characteristic. The instrument here, then, would appear to be originally a Cheshire Lines instrument, but when it went through the works at some point, it acquired a Midland needle and a Midland surround plate. So, something a bit unusual.
And so you just see the remains of...
It's for Zackerley South.
Exactly south.
Yeah. They're exceedingly rare. So this is obviously pretty unusual too. But a nice example of something which is not quite what it first seems.
And still maintaining.
It has. It's got its brake seal there, yes.
So there's a very fine bit of glass on the front there and the paper ticket behind it.
It explains what it was for as well. It release line clear, controlled by distance. So if your distant detection failed, you would break the glass, I assume. By the way, just in case anybody wonders if this is a CLC top on the Midland base, we can check that. Unscrew it. Okay, take it off. We see there, star 2. And if we tip on the top, there's more stampings, 2 star. So they do indeed match. Furthermore, we have some clues. A little tag, down block, Slope BC station, then 42 YCR R.
Slot check-in relay.
So if anybody knows who that was, then we'd be interested to know.
And I just noticed, it's still got its original cloth wrap wire as well, just there.
Ah.
Later rubberised, earlier cloth wrap.